Melinda and Aaron Taylor seemed like the perfect couple until one stormy night. She vanished without a trace, and he claimed she ran away. 3 years later, Aaron was living a new life, spending her insurance money, convinced he got away with murder. But when a disoriented woman walked into a police station hundreds of miles away, everything he buried came clawing back to the surface. Melinda had survived, and she remembered everything. Aaron and Melinda Taylor were the kind of couple people quietly admired. In their quiet neighborhood just outside Sacramento, they gave off the image of stability and affection. Their single-story home with the white picket fence, a small vegetable garden, and two playful rescue dogs painted a picture of suburban bliss. Friends saw them grocery shopping together, laughing at the local diner, and cheering at community softball games. To outsiders, they looked like the definition of happily ever after. But behind closed doors, the cracks had already started forming. Aaron, a tall, rugged man in his early 40s, worked as a construction foreman. He left early and came home late. Melinda, a gentle, artistic woman, had once filled their house with color paintings on every wall, handmade decorations, and shelves of pottery from her studio. But her energy had changed over the past year. Her art classes at the local community center grew fewer. Her smile, once natural and frequent, seemed forced when it did appear. Aaron had been hiding something for months: massive gambling debts and a quiet addiction to online betting. He was careful. He didn't leave evidence on their shared devices. But money had started disappearing. Melinda noticed the mortgage was behind. Their joint account was nearly empty, and Aaron dismissed her questions with vague answers and short tempers. At first, she thought it was stress from work. Then came the excuses, the weekend job trips that left no photos, and the receipts from restaurants she'd never been to. What Melinda didn't know yet was that Aaron had also started seeing someone else, a bartender he met during one of his late-night escapes to a sports bar 2 towns over. She was younger, flirty, and had no idea he was married. To her, Aaron was a single man who lived alone, trying to rebuild his life after a toxic relationship. He had built 2 different realities and kept both of them carefully apart. Melinda's sister Rachel had grown increasingly worried. She noticed Melinda wearing long sleeves even on warm days. She saw her flinch when someone raised their voice. Melinda no longer called just to talk. Their weekly brunches had stopped. One afternoon, Rachel finally came over unannounced. Melinda opened the door slowly, her eyes red. The house looked different: no candles, no fresh flowers, no background music. Just silence. Melinda brushed off Rachel's concern, said she was tired, that she was taking a break from painting to focus on herself. But Rachel didn't buy it. Something in her sister's eyes, fear, maybe told her the truth was buried much deeper. A few weeks later, Melinda disappeared. It happened on a Tuesday morning in early May. Aaron told the police they had an argument the night before. She had packed a bag and said she needed time alone. He claimed she left in their silver Toyota Corolla and drove off without telling him where she was going. When she didn't return by nightfall, he said he assumed she needed space. But after 2 full days without any word, he filed a missing person report. Police questioned Aaron, who calmly repeated his version of events. He even gave them a handwritten note he said he found on the kitchen table: Melinda S. alleged goodbye. In shaky cursive, the letter claimed she was overwhelmed and needed time to rethink everything. Investigators noted the odd phrasing but found no immediate reason to doubt him. Melinda's car was discovered parked at a trailhead in the Sierra Nevada foothills, about 2 hours from their home. The keys were in the glove box. Her phone was missing. A half-empty water bottle sat in the cup holder. No signs of a struggle. No blood, no purse. No footprints leading away from the car, just silence. The community was shocked. Vigils were held. Flyers were taped to every store window. Local news stations aired segments about Melinda's disappearance. Aaron appeared on camera, eyes glassy, his voice trembling. He begged for her return. "If you're watching, Melinda, please come home. I love you. We can fix this." But not everyone believed the act. Rachel went straight to detectives. She told them about Melinda's fear, the bruises, the financial problems, the late-night disappearances. She handed over text messages Melinda had sent her in the weeks before she vanished. In one, Melinda wrote, "I feel like I'm living with a stranger. Sometimes I wonder if he even wants me here." Another text read, "He gets angry so fast now. I don't feel safe when he's drinking." Still, none of it was concrete. No body, no proof of foul play. Just suspicions and scattered pieces that didn't form a full picture. Law enforcement opened a missing persons case, searched the hiking trail with dogs and helicopters, and interviewed hikers in the area. But nothing turned up. Weeks passed, then months, and slowly the attention faded. Aaron stayed in the house for a while, but neighbors noticed changes. He no longer attended vigils. The flowerbed Melinda used to care for turned brown. The porch lights stayed off at night. Within 5 months, Aaron quietly sold the house and moved to a nearby town. A few weeks later, he was seen driving a brand-new pickup truck and moving in with a woman no one recognized. Rumors began to swirl. Back in the small town where Melinda vanished, Rachel kept pushing. She created a social media page urging people to share tips. She drove the trail area herself, handing out flyers and talking to rangers. She wrote to true crime blogs, sent letters to news channels, and begged police to reopen the case with new eyes. But the official word remained the same: no evidence of a crime, no confirmed sightings, no suspects. Just a note, a parked car, and a woman who vanished into thin air. Aaron believed the storm had passed, that he had outlasted suspicion, that his carefully orchestrated lie had worked. And he continued building his new life, one lie at a time. But deep in the desert, hundreds of miles away, a woman stirred awake in a clinic unsure of her name, haunted by flashes of trees, headlights, and a man with blood on his hands. Unbeknownst to him, Melinda wasn't gone, and she was slowly remembering everything. 3 months after Melinda vanished, the case that once dominated local headlines began to fade from public memory. The posters were taken down. The candles from the last vigil had long since burned out. Most people in the neighborhood had quietly accepted the story that Melinda had chosen to leave. Maybe the pressure of a troubled marriage and a complicated life had pushed her to disappear on her own terms. That's what Aaron wanted everyone to believe, and for a while, it worked. He kept a low profile for the first few months, but things began to change quickly. First came the life insurance payout, $750,000. Filed and processed just 6 months after Melinda's disappearance. With no body found, he had to wait for a court declaration of presumed death, but Aaron's calm demeanor and the presence of the goodbye note made it easy for his lawyer to push through the request. He claimed he needed the money to settle debts and rebuild. The court agreed. He cashed the check and disappeared from his old life. Aaron moved to a newer neighborhood just outside of Fresno. The houses were bigger, more modern, and the people were newer, meaning fewer questions. He bought a brand new black Ford F-150, installed security cameras around his property, and started dating again. His new girlfriend, Brittany, was a bartender at a local sports bar. She was 27, energetic, and unaware of his past. Aaron never mentioned Melinda. If someone asked, he said his ex-wife had passed away in a hiking accident. No need to dig deeper. He lived like a man who had survived a tragedy, quietly, cautiously, but with the confidence of someone who believed the worst was behind him. Meanwhile, Rachel was still fighting. She hadn't stopped searching, even as the world moved on. She refused to believe her sister had simply chosen to walk away. Melinda was not impulsive. She loved her art, her dogs, and her family. She wouldn't leave without a word, especially not to Rachel. Something had happened, and Rachel was determined to prove it. She spent nights digging into phone records, bank transactions, and Melinda's social media activity. Nothing after the date of her disappearance. Her phone had last pinged near the trailhead, then went dark. Credit cards were never used again. Her email was never accessed. Rachel even hired a private investigator, but he too came back with nothing conclusive. Melinda had simply vanished. When Rachel went back to the police, she brought a folder filled with suspicions texts, bank statements, the sudden life insurance claim, but the detective in charge was polite and firm. Without new evidence, the case couldn't be reopened. It was still classified as a missing person case, not a homicide. And without a body or proof of foul play, there was nowhere to go. Rachel turned to the internet next. She started a blog dedicated to her sister's case, writing weekly updates and sharing theories. It didn't go viral, but it gathered a small group of followers, true crime enthusiasts, amateur sleuths, and people who had also lost someone. Slowly, she found others willing to share resources and advice. She began piecing together a timeline, gathering satellite images, weather records, and topography maps of the area where Melinda's car was found. One commenter suggested she look into Aaron's finances. Another pointed out that suicide victims usually leave behind more evidence of distress. Someone else recommended handwriting analysis for the note. Rachel had never thought to question the note before. She assumed it was real. But once the idea was planted, she couldn't let it go. She took a copy of the note to a forensic document analyst. After a few weeks of examination, the expert concluded the handwriting bore inconsistencies with Melinda's known samples. The strokes were forced. The slant was unnatural. It appeared written by someone attempting to mimic her writing style. It wasn't definitive proof of forgery, but it was enough to raise more questions. Rachel sent the analysis to the police, but again they remained non-committal. Still, something had shifted. A new detective, recently transferred from another district, took casual interest in the file. Detective Collins was known for revisiting cold cases, often finding overlooked details others had missed. He requested access to the original note and re-interviewed Rachel, this time asking more specific questions. He also started looking into Aaron. Aaron, by this time, was preparing to propose to Brittany. She had moved in with him a few months earlier, and their Instagram was filled with vacation photos, weekend getaways, and pictures of their newly adopted dog. He had completely reinvented himself. No one in Brittany's circle knew anything about Melinda. If they had, Aaron had a different story for each person. He was a master of shaping the truth into whatever version suited him best. But he hadn't planned for someone to keep digging. Detective Collins noticed inconsistencies in Aaron's statements from the original investigation. He reviewed body cam footage from the night Aaron reported Melinda missing and noted how calm he seemed. Too calm. He also flagged the unusual timing of the life insurance claim, filed within weeks of her disappearance, despite there being no body and no indication of death. Then came a surprise. While combing through regional missing persons data, Collins found a case from Arizona, an unidentified woman found near a desert highway 2 years earlier. She had suffered head trauma, memory loss, and gave the name Linda Martin. No one claimed her. She had no ID, and after being checked into a small clinic, she vanished again without a trace. Out of curiosity, Collins ran facial recognition software on the photo taken at the clinic. The result came back with a high-confidence match, Melinda Taylor. Collins couldn't believe it. Could she be alive all this time? Rachel was contacted immediately. She broke down when she saw the photo, thin, sunburned, and disoriented, but unmistakably her sister. New hope surged through her. This time, there was something real to follow. Meanwhile, Aaron remained unaware. He continued planning his future, still convinced that his past had been buried for good. But Melinda, the woman he believed was dead, had survived. She had lived in the shadows, clinging to fragments of her identity, and now she was inching closer to the truth. The quiet web he had spun was beginning to unravel. And when it did, the entire world would finally know what really happened the night she disappeared. It had been nearly 3 years since Melinda vanished, and by now, most people had accepted that she was gone for good. The case was cold, and even the most committed volunteers had moved on to other causes. But then, a heavy rainstorm triggered a mudslide near the hiking trail where Melinda's car was once found. Rescue crews clearing debris stumbled upon what looked like human remains, scattered bones tangled in tree roots, partially buried beneath a collapsed section of trail. The discovery made headlines immediately. The area was cordoned off, and forensic teams arrived within hours. The remains were incomplete, degraded by years of exposure and erosion, but alongside them were several personal items: a rusted necklace, a faded flannel shirt, a pair of hiking boots, and a charm bracelet with the letter M. Local media quickly speculated that the mystery had finally been solved, that Melinda Taylor had been found. For many, it seemed like the case had reached its conclusion. Rachel was contacted by authorities and asked to provide a DNA sample for comparison. She prepared herself for the worst, believing that after years of uncertainty, her sister's body had finally been recovered. The bracelet had been a gift from their late mother, something Melinda wore often. Rachel recognized it immediately. Aaron's reaction was more calculated. When a reporter called his office for comment, he issued a brief statement through a lawyer. He called the discovery painful, but healing, and thanked the community for their thoughts and prayers. He was seen the next day leaving his home with Brittany, both wearing somber expressions, acting as though the news had brought them grief. The remains were sent to the state lab for analysis. It would take weeks, but initial results suggested the bones belonged to a female between 30 and 40 years old, matching Melinda's profile. News stations treated the discovery as a breakthrough. Talk shows rehashed the original case. Podcasts did retrospectives. Rachel found herself flooded with messages from people offering condolences and closure. But then everything shifted again. When the DNA results came back, the lab confirmed something shocking. The remains were not Melinda's. In fact, they didn't match anyone in the national database. The body belonged to another woman, still unidentified, likely missing around the same time, but never connected to Melinda's case. The bracelet, it turned out, had been a common design sold in dozens of stores across California during the same year. The mistake reignited old questions. If that wasn't Melinda, then where was she? Detective Collins, who had taken a deeper interest in the case, decided to look at everything again from the beginning. He ordered a second analysis of the goodbye note, this time involving two independent experts. Both concluded it showed signs of simulated handwriting and possible coercion. The spacing, pressure, and tone all differed from Melinda's known writings. Collins took it as confirmation that the note was not genuine. Digging deeper into Aaron's activities following Melinda's disappearance, Collins found red flags. There were large withdrawals from Melinda's personal account made days before she went missing. Records showed Aaron had transferred money to a private online betting site, one that had since been shut down due to fraud. The timeline showed a desperate man on the edge of financial collapse who suddenly regained stability within weeks of his wife's disappearance. Then came the breakthrough. While reviewing old missing persons reports from the Southwest region, Collins found an unusual case file out of Arizona. It described an unidentified woman found near a highway outside Yuma. She was discovered wandering barefoot, disoriented, dehydrated, and suffering from severe memory loss. When asked her name, she called herself Linda Martin, a name no one could trace. She was taken to a small medical clinic and treated for head trauma and sun exposure. Her behavior was strange, distrustful, especially around men. She refused to stay in one place for long. After 5 days at the clinic, she vanished without telling anyone. The report included a photo taken at the time of her admission. Collins uploaded it into a facial recognition tool and ran it through Melinda's DMV photo for comparison. The result came back with a match score of 92%. It was her. Rachel was contacted immediately and shown the photo. Despite the sunburn, tangled hair, and hollow eyes, she recognized her sister instantly. The resemblance was undeniable. Her hand shook as she stared at the image, overwhelmed with a mix of horror and hope. For the first time in years, there was real proof that Melinda could still be alive. A new search began. This time focused on shelters, clinics, and roadside motels across New Mexico and Arizona. Collins contacted medical facilities, scanned law enforcement databases for Jane Does, and interviewed workers at the clinic where Linda Martin had stayed. One nurse remembered her clearly, a quiet woman who panicked when male staff entered the room, who never made phone calls or asked about family. She would sit by the window for hours staring at the desert. Then, a tip came in from a small shelter near Albuquerque. A woman matching the description had been staying there on and off, using the name Marie. She kept to herself, avoided attention, and had vanished again after seeing a poster on the shelter bulletin board. It was the missing persons poster. Melinda's photo had been added during the renewed media attention following the discovery of the other woman's body. 1 week later, Melinda walked into a police station in Santa Fe. She was gaunt, sunburnt, and emotionally fragile. Her eyes darted around the room. Her voice was soft, unsure. But when asked her name, she paused, then whispered, "Melinda Taylor." Word spread quickly. The woman long believed dead had returned. Media outlets rushed to break the story. Rachel was flown in immediately and collapsed into tears the moment she saw her sister. Forensics confirmed the match within 2 days. Melinda had survived. She remembered fragments of the night she disappeared, an argument in the woods, a blow to the head, the sound of tires on gravel. She had awakened alone, bleeding, with no idea where she was. She wandered through the forest, eventually reaching a highway where she collapsed. A stranger had picked her up and dropped her at the nearest clinic. The trauma left her mind fractured and her memories faded into fragments, but deep down her survival instincts never faded. And now, the truth was beginning to surface. Aaron had thought she was dead. He had built a new life on that assumption. But Melinda had returned, and with her return, the entire story was about to be rewritten. The world reacted with shock as news broke that Melinda Taylor, the woman long believed to be dead, had been found alive in New Mexico. For days, the headlines were dominated by images of her gaunt face, her sunken eyes, and the incredible fact that she had somehow survived 3 years off the grid. She was no longer just a missing person. She was a living witness to her own attempted murder. When detectives brought her back to California, they treated her with care. A trauma counselor was assigned, and she was gradually introduced to her old life, first with photos, then with familiar objects, and finally with the presence of her sister Rachel, who stayed by her side. It took time for Melinda to open up. Her mind was still fogged by years of confusion and survival instinct. But with patience and the gentle guidance of professionals, the pieces began to come together. Her memories returned in sharp fragments. She remembered the night she left home with Aaron. They had argued, and he insisted they go for a drive to talk things out. She agreed reluctantly. He took her far from town, claiming he knew a quiet place in the woods. As they parked near the trailhead, the tension grew. He became hostile, accusations turned to yelling. Then out of nowhere he hit her. Her head struck a rock and everything went black. The next time she opened her eyes, it was still dark. She was cold, wet, and alone. Her head pounded, her body ached. She didn't remember who she was or how she got there. All she knew was that she had to move. She stumbled through the forest for hours, surviving on instinct alone until she found a road. She flagged down a truck. The driver didn't ask questions. He dropped her at the nearest building, a tiny clinic in Arizona. There, she was treated for head trauma and dehydration. She told the staff her name was Linda Martin, a name that had surfaced randomly from her fractured memory. They assumed she was a drifter, a victim of some personal trauma. No one looked deeper. And after just 5 days she left, overwhelmed by fear and confusion. She believed someone was looking for her, and not in a good way. She spent the next few years living under different names, bouncing between shelters and temporary housing programs. She trusted no one. She avoided police, doctors, and anyone who might dig into her past. Her instincts told her that going back would mean danger. It wasn't until she saw her own face on a poster at a shelter, "Missing Melinda Taylor," that the final piece clicked into place. That night, she boarded a bus and turned herself in at a police station. With her statement, law enforcement now had what they needed to act. Everything Aaron had done suddenly made sense: his urgency to file the missing person report, the suspicious goodbye note, the quick life insurance claim, the new girlfriend, and the sudden financial rebound. All of it had been part of a larger plan. Within 48 hours of Melinda's reappearance, Aaron Taylor was arrested at his home. He was taken into custody without incident, caught completely off guard. His new fiancée, Brittany, stood by in confusion as officers led him out of the house in handcuffs. She hadn't even known he was still legally married, let alone that his deceased ex-wife was alive. Aaron was charged with attempted murder, insurance fraud, obstruction of justice, and falsification of evidence. He remained stone-faced as cameras flashed during his perp walk. His carefully constructed world had collapsed. Everything he had buried had surfaced again with a vengeance. The trial that followed became a national sensation. Journalists packed the courtroom. Podcasters released episode after episode dissecting the timeline. True crime YouTubers analyzed every frame of Aaron's public appearances. but no one could have predicted the details that came out during testimony. Forensic experts confirmed that the goodbye note was a forgery. The pressure of the pen, the natural flow of the letters, and inconsistencies in phrasing all pointed to Aaron. Digital forensics showed that Aaron had searched online for how to fake handwriting just days before Melinda vanished. His bank records revealed a history of gambling losses and high-interest loans. He had been on the edge of ruin before Melinda disappeared. Melinda took the stand, trembling as she described the night she was left for dead. She didn't cry. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. But the courtroom sat in complete silence as she spoke, each word cutting through the air like glass. She described waking up alone, her face covered in blood, and the long days of wandering through the wilderness with no memory of who she was. She described the fear that lived in her even when she didn't know why. The defense tried to paint Aaron as a man overwhelmed by financial pressure, someone who believed his wife had left him and cracked under stress. But the evidence was too strong. The timeline, the insurance money, the note, and Melinda's own words told the real story. The jury deliberated for only a few hours. Aaron was found guilty on all charges. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He showed no emotion as the verdict was read, only a faint, bitter smile that faded quickly as he was led away. Melinda didn't attend the sentencing. She chose peace instead. Her sister read a short statement on her behalf. "I survived because I had to. I came back because the truth matters. And now I can begin again." The trial ended, but the impact lingered. Melinda became a symbol of strength for thousands of people who had been through trauma. Interviews flooded in. Documentaries were made. Offers for book deals appeared in her inbox, but she declined them all. She didn't want fame. She wanted silence, peace, and freedom. She left California and settled in a quiet town in Oregon, far from the noise. She took back her maiden name and adopted a new dog. She began teaching art again at a local community center, surrounded by people who didn't know her past. Slowly, she started to smile again, not the forced kind, but real ones. Aaron thought he had buried the truth along with his wife. He thought he had created the perfect crime and walked away untouched. But Melinda's survival ruined that illusion. She rose from the shadows he thought would consume her forever. And in the end, the man who thought he got away with everything lost the only thing he cared about: control. The morning after Aaron Taylor was sentenced to life in prison, the world finally began to move on. The courtroom was emptied, the reporters packed up, and the buzz that had surrounded the case for weeks slowly faded. For most people, it was the conclusion of a shocking story and attempted murder, a miraculous return and a cold-blooded criminal brought to justice. But for Melinda, it was not the end. It was the beginning of something far more difficult, reclaiming the life that had been taken from her. She left California within a week. The same streets that once held memories now felt haunted. Every sidewalk, every intersection brought back fragments of a life she could no longer trust. She chose a quiet coastal town in Oregon, where no one knew her name, no one stared at her face, and no one asked what had happened. She rented a small cottage with faded blue shutters and a garden overrun with weeds. It was the kind of place people passed without noticing, and that was exactly what she needed. She adopted a rescue dog, a quiet Labrador with kind eyes. She named him Shadow. Together they started walking the trails behind her house, slowly pushing past the anxiety that still gripped her chest in tight waves. The first time she walked alone through the woods, her hands trembled. Every crack of a twig, every rustle of leaves sent panic through her body. But with each step, she reminded herself, and was gone. He could never hurt her again. Rebuilding her identity wasn't easy. Her memory, though mostly restored, still held gaps. Some nights she dreamed of headlights in the dark. Other nights she woke in a sweat, convinced she was still trapped in the forest where she nearly died. But she refused to give those fears more space than they deserved. Therapy helped, art helped more. Her hands, once frozen by fear, began to paint again. The blank canvas slowly became her voice. She started teaching part-time at a local community center. She never spoke of her past. To the students, she was just kind, soft-spoken, and always carrying a thermos of tea. Her classes grew popular for their calm atmosphere and the way she made every student feel seen. She rarely smiled in photos. But in person, there was a quiet warmth to her, the kind that people felt before they even realized it. Back in California, Rachel took over Melinda's legal affairs. She closed old accounts, sold off what remained of the house, and made sure every trace of Aaron's existence was wiped from Melinda's life. She visited once, bringing old photo albums and a few letters from people who had followed Melinda's story. One of them was from a woman in New York who had survived a violent relationship and said Melinda's courage had saved her. Another was from a man who had lost his sister and found hope after watching the trial. Melinda read them once and then tucked them away, grateful but still not ready to become anyone's symbol. The story didn't disappear entirely. Documentaries were made. Podcasts dissected every detail. A best-selling true crime book hit the shelves, detailing Aaron's manipulation and the years Melinda spent in the shadows. It became a case study in police training programs and psychology courses, but Melinda didn't participate in any of it. She declined interviews and media offers. When asked for comments, she responded with silence. For her, this wasn't entertainment. It was survival. Aaron, meanwhile, began serving his sentence in a maximum security prison in Northern California. He kept to himself, refusing interviews, declining visitors. Inside those walls, he was no longer the charming contractor or the grieving husband. He was inmate number 487,301, a man with no future. A man who had gambled everything on a lie and lost it all the moment Melinda walked back into the world. Prison didn't break him, but it exposed him. Without the freedom to control the narrative, he shrank. No more staged grief. No more hiding. Just cold concrete, metal bars, and the echo of a name he could no longer erase. The legal aftermath stretched on quietly. Melinda filed a civil lawsuit against Aaron, demanding full repayment of the insurance money he had stolen. She didn't care about the money, but she wanted the record to reflect the truth. The court ruled in her favor. Every cent he had gained from her supposed death was ordered returned. His assets were liquidated, leaving him with nothing but prison-issued clothing and a steel bed frame. But none of that gave Melinda back the years she had lost. Sometimes she thought about the life she could have had, the children they never had, the trips they never took, the artwork she never finished. But she didn't let herself dwell on those things for long. Regret was a weight she couldn't afford to carry. She had survived something most people didn't, and she was still standing, her days settled into a quiet rhythm. Morning walks with shadow. Afternoon classes. Evening tea and music from an old radio she found at a thrift store. She didn't seek love again. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But she found peace in the stillness, in knowing that no one owned her story but herself. And yet, sometimes she would catch her reflection in a window and barely recognize the woman looking back. She wasn't the same person who once painted in a sunlit room and dreamed of growing old with someone she trusted. That version of her was gone. But what had taken its place was something stronger. Scarred, yes, but unbreakable. She wrote in a journal each night, not long entries, just fragments. Thoughts, memories, gratitude. One evening she wrote, "He tried to bury me in silence, but I came back louder than he ever expected." She didn't need the world to know what happened, but she needed herself to never forget. 3 years after the trial, the world had moved on to other stories, other scandals. Melinda remained in her small town, mostly anonymous. Some people called her brave. Some called her a miracle. But to herself, she was just a woman who survived what was meant to kill her. And in that survival, she had reclaimed the one thing Aaron thought he had destroyed completely: her future. Aaron believed he had erased her from existence. He believed the lie was perfect, the story sealed, but Melinda had returned. And with every step she took forward, she rewrote the ending he thought he had authored. She wasn't just the woman who came back from the dead. She was the woman who refused to be forgotten.